people, Andrew is also a familiar face. He's been traveling around New Zealand for some time. Me myself, I do the sales for Grodan in Central Eastern Europe and sorry, Central Eastern Europe, in Asia and the Pacific. Um, we've been conducting the low energy input trial now for 3 years, and this is what we will be discussing today. The result of the second year. We've just started the third year. I think Andy will touch this topic briefly um, as well why we started these trials, but briefly uh, during the the start of the Ukraine war, the energy prices rose through the roof here in Europe, and we thought, how can we help the growers to decrease or at least control the energy prices while still maintaining a very strong, productive, vigorous crop, tomato crop. And with partners, industry partners, we've set a trial called the low energy input trial, mainly with predominantly with Philips, to see how we can all get this together. How can we still grow these strong tomato crops while reducing energy consumption? Um, Andy, you have been in the lead for this. You're the knowledge manager of Grodan, so can you please share this knowledge you have obtained through the past 2 years and specifically on the second year with the group today?
Yeah, no worries. Well, I've made some slides, and what I've attempted to do is set the scene and then combine the last 2 years into one presentation, give you an overview of the approach that we took, the savings that we made, and then what we are doing this year. Um, so again, it's 100% funded by Grodan and Philips, so we pay 50-50 each. And we made the agreement in 2023 that we would do this collaboration for 3 years. So I'll share my screen. Don't be shocked at the number of sheets because we'll go fast. If anybody's got any questions, just maybe let me know, because now I can't see you guys. Okay. So this is what we'll cover. When we think about energy inputs, majority of that energy input is in humidity control. So I'd like to take you on a journey. There's no revolution in our industry. It's always an evolution. And sometimes we forget where we were 25 years ago. So I take you back 25 years. Then I want to give you a summary of what we've been doing to reduce that energy input. And it's about everything. You don't just focus on one thing. Yeah. So when you have to look at everything. So it's the climate, it's lighting, because it's with Philips, of course. It's irrigation and importantly nutrition. It's often forgotten. And then I'll give you some overview, compared to reference growers in the study, the kind of savings that we've made. And then I'll introduce you to what we're doing this year. So if I take you back 25 years, if you all remember these buzzwords in the consultancy and growing sphere, it was an active climate. We had maximum pipe temperatures 80 degrees, minimum pipes of 40, 45, increasing if the humidity was bad, maybe to 50, 55, sometimes even 60. Yeah. There was no fixed climate screens, and effectively in the early parts of the crop, you're just pushing water through the plants and into the greenhouse environment. And I remember coming into the industry back then, well, a few years prior, but the research question then, especially in the UK, with the GrowSave consortium of the NFU, so Farm Energy Services, there was a question, yeah? And the question was, should I heat first, then vent, or should I vent first, then heat? So typically that was answered. Normally I say to the audience, what do you think? But I'll save time. Back then, it was more energy efficient to vent first, then heat. And this was due to what they call the structural heat loss. So the difference between the inside greenhouse temperature and the outside. And the bigger you make that difference, the greater the structural heat loss. And of course, if you heat first, at some point, the temperature will be wrong and you're going to have to open the vents anyway. So vent first, then heat. Then, as Tico alluded to, we're never short of crisis or legislation that drives change in this industry. So we've had a number of energy crises, and that has meant, certainly in Europe, that we've invested in research. So what started around 2010, was from the Cas Alge energy. My Dutch is bad, especially at 7 o'clock in the morning. So was all of this investment in energy saving. So if we look now that climate screens have become standard pieces of equipment, the greenhouses themselves are more insulated. The knowledge programs, so Louis Taylor, have created new insights and understanding, related to the plant and how it's reacting to its greenhouse and surrounding environments. We've seen new words appear in our vocabulary, things like absolute humidity and heat emission, and they were captured in this book that you may have seen called Plant Empowerment. And with this knowledge, we started to ask ourselves new questions in relation to humidity control. And this was, should I gap the screen or should I vent above a closed screen? And basically that question was answered. It's far more energy efficient and you create a far more stable, uniform greenhouse climate when you vent above a closed screen. So if we look to and I've taken some crop registration data for a tomato grower in the Netherlands from 2001 until 2020. And in 2020, this greenhouse was sold. So that's when the data stops. Dotted line is where I'm also missing data, but I've got the endpoint. So I've just joined them with a dotted line. But basically, you see that, the yield has improved over the years. Varieties change, of course. Importantly, energy consumption has dropped, and it's almost halved. So right now, if we talk about tomatoes, you're around that 30 cubic meters of gas per square meter, for example. So then if you want a sustainability index on this or something, if you look to the yield kilograms per meter squared per cubic meter of gas, then effectively we've almost trebled the output. So this gives you an indication of where we are. This data is for a non-lit tomato crop, and they're using the OCAP CO2 from the Shell oil refinery in Rotterdam. But just to give you an indication, and effectively, biggest energy saving, you can see 2006, energy screens were inserted into that greenhouse. And then incrementally, we've learned how to use the screens better, and further reductions have been made. So if I take you to the present day, we don't use minimum pipes anymore. So we avoid unnecessarily increasing the greenhouse humidity via evaporation. So we're not pushing water through plants anymore. Heat input is based typically on heat demand. So generally maximum pipe temperatures would be 45 degrees. In some instances, a lot of instances, we've got double screens. If it's a lighted crop, then the SON-T, the high pressure sodium, is being replaced by more electrically efficient LED lights. So if I take it now into the context of the work we're doing with Philips, if you look to a lit crop over winter in Europe, the radiant heat input into the greenhouse is drastically reduced. There's no radiant heat from the sun, there's no radiant heat from the lamps, there's no radiant heat from the pipes, or limited. So we know evaporation costs energy, I just showed you earlier, but evaporation is also needed for nutrient uptake and growth. So I still need to stimulate sufficient evaporation for nutrient uptake and growth. And that was the issue that growers were facing. Yeah, they're thinking 30 cubic, we can't go any lower, because if we go lower, we get into issues. Yeah. So, as I said before, we need a holistic approach to this. So, conversations with Philips, I think just following Green Tech in 2013, we decided to investigate this issue. So, the trials are done at a place called Botany BV in the Netherlands. It's close to Venlo. It's a 260 square meter research compartment. You see it in the picture. The first two cultivations were with Vitalian, so cherry on the vine. This year, we've switched to the variety called Max Size from Axia Seeds. So, again, what I described, in winter, minimum radiant heat input. Are there still opportunities for lowering heat input and still controlling humidity, stimulating sufficient transpiration and nutrient uptake, and realizing sufficient yield and quality? So just to give you a really high level overview, you can see that in year one, we started with lead installation of 250, in year three, 300, and now we're on 350. And that's also going in line with industry over here in Europe. So in year one, we set the research goals. Can we reduce heat input by 40% compared to practice? And by doing that, can we realize sufficient crop yield and fruit quality? Year two was more about, hey, repeating the energy savings we made in year one, but can we further improve light use efficiency by dynamically steering the LED lights? Yeah, so we make more electrical energy savings. And also, from the learnings in trial two, is like, how can we play with the nutrition to work on fruit size and or bricks? Yeah, because you've got to remember, bricks is dry matter and fruit size is fresh weight. So you play with one, you lose the other. But can we get the best of both worlds? Yeah. Year three, I said we've switched to a different variety called Max Size. As the light levels in the greenhouse increase, the issue of interlights comes back in. So rather than steering now with the lights dynamically, Philips are investigating, can we further improve light use efficiency by using interlights? We've got different sensors in there. So this year we've got a net radiation sensor. So can we use that to further improve screen control? And what happens with max size in Europe, when you attempt to reduce the heat input to save costs, then it does suffer from uneven ripening, red-green fruits. And that is all to do, our hypothesis is, with nutrition management, particularly sulfates inhibiting cation uptake. So that's a focus now for this year. So we had a discussion in the research team, and we decided that we would push. This is all about anticipating what growers will be doing in a few years' time. So we said the next step in humidity control is now active dehumidification. So we invested in this system. It was the air energy system from Amalan. You can find it on YouTube. Other systems are available, but in a sense, there's a chimney, if you like, on the gable end of the greenhouse. The top of the chimney is about 15 centimeters below the LED lights. And essentially that chimney takes warm, moist air, it extracts it through the greenhouse and it pulls in cold, dry air. You can see there are sleeves below the gutters, and that's where the air comes in. Yeah. So that's just to give you an overview. Kind of the system in a schematic diagram is on the left there. Important to note that the air flows don't mix. They just cross each other over a heat exchanger. And on the right side there, I won't go into detail, but it just shows you how the system dehumidifies the greenhouse. Now, what we learned in year one is if it was very cold outside, then we had trouble trying to realize the greenhouse temperature. Yeah. So what we did in the year two is we invested in a heat block. That allowed us to increase the temperature of the incoming outside air such that we could blow in that at, I think it was 1 degree above greenhouse temperature as a maximum. And that created a much more uniform vertical temperature profile as well as horizontal temperature profile. So that was an improvement from what we'd learned in year one to what we took forward in year two, and of course now into year three. Apart from that, the dehumidification system is exactly the same. We've just learned how to use it more efficiently or effectively. Just to give you an example of what we mean by, stable climate, remember, benefit of the humidity system, active dehumidification, it allows us to keep the screens closed and the vents closed. So if you remember what I told you about, that stable greenhouse climate coming from the new way of growing research, this is why we get such a stable greenhouse climate in the lead winter season. So just to give you an indication, whatever we ask for, we get. Yeah. So typically the HDs we work with are on the right hand side there, just to give you an overview. So very much your set point control is following actual control. And as I said, if we look to the number of screen hours now, you can see in the middle of the lead winter, let's say from weeks 47 to around week 4, we've got 9 consecutive weeks there where the screen is virtually closed 24/7. And sometimes the only reason the screen opens is for UV light to allow the bees to fly. And you've got to imagine yourself, that's a bit crazy, isn't it? Yeah. So that's not a problem that we're going to solve. That's something for the people of, the Coppets and Syngentas of this world. Yeah. But actually what we did do with the spectral lights, we did demonstrate to the growers that we could use, because we've got, 2 multi-channel LED lights and we can control them with different recipes. We did boost, for example, what we call bee light in the middle of the day, where we just increased some blue-green light, and effectively bees can fly if that's around 30, minimum like 35 micromole. But we just demonstrated that to say, hey, this is what the control you can get now by dynamically steering the lights, and you can have different recipes. Of course, in our small greenhouse, how lost can the bees get? Yeah. But anyway, that was what we did. And of course, keeping those screens closed and the vents closed, that's why we saved a lot of energy. Yeah. So I'll just give you a brief overview of the climate management now. In trial 1, which is the yellow line, we thought we needed to work with a lot of speed. So we had quite a high RTR. So the 24-hour temperature was around 20.8. In trial 2, we reduced our learnings. So our average 24-hour temperature was around 20.1. In both, as we said, we have very stable greenhouse temperatures during the main period of the lighting season. And working with a lower, what we had in trial 1, we came across some fruit size, not really quality, but some issues of fruit size. due to a high fruit load. So in trial 2, we adjusted the density, we went later to the final density, so 4.1 to 5. We were a month later in that increase in trial 2 compared to trial 1. We solved the issue of fruit size. To give you an example of the heating input, we only use the grow pipe. So
can
the
I
position.
Yeah. Sorry, Andrew. Can I ask one
Yeah.
question? You're talking about the max size and you are running 4.1 density. Is that right?
No, the trial 1 and 2 is Vitalian from Nunham's. Max size is what we have now this year, and we don't have any date. It was only planted on the 24th of September.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these results are coming from trials 1 and 2 with Vitalian. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Small variety. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So on top left there, you see some kind of you see the indication of the heat input in cubic meters of gas per square meter. So if you take that to a reference grower, you can see they're around a cubic meter per week, and you can get an idea of the type of energy savings that we made. Yeah. So if we look to trial 1, so over the 30 weeks of the trial, yeah, from week 39 in 20 whatever it was to week 16 the following year, we used 10 cubic meters of gas per square meter for heat input. In trial 2, we used 9.21, yeah, and that was split between 7 with the pipes and 1.5 for the heat block. And the biggest differences you can see between trial 1 and 2 are learnings, yeah, is you can see on top right, we use the growing pipe, the pipe rail much less. Primarily is because we invested in more insulating climate screens coming from Ridder. I can tell you the details later. Of course, we had the heat block on the air energy system. And importantly, remember, holistic approach, we created more generative plant balance, steering on the irrigation and the nutrition, taking the learnings from year 1 and strengthening those in year 2, and I'll come back to that. Yeah. So you can see on bottom right there the big differences in terms of year 1, year 2. Yeah. So just a general overview, and again, I'm highlighting the approach that we took across now for the 2 years. Yeah. So we had objectives. We needed to create the balance, strong generative, but with a lower heat input. We needed to ensure we got sufficient transpiration to ensure sufficient total nutrient uptake. And we needed to make sure that we looked after the roots, because what growers were facing as they're coming out of the winter lighting season into the spring is they witness a loss of production in May and June because of the root quality. So we wanted, while we weren't taking the trial forwards, we wanted to show them basically, hey, that by week 16, 17, the crop is not exhausted. It has the strength and the power to go on through the summer. Give you an idea of the substrate system. We've got 8.2 litres of volume per square metre, which is the average for the Dutch industry. Now, what that translates to, yeah, so no matter what your substrate volume is, you should be thinking how you irrigate that substrate as a percentage of your substrate volume. Yeah. So, of course, 1% of 8.2 litres is 82 mil per square metre. And based on our dripper system, on the far right column, you see what that means in mils per dripper. Now, of course, you can imagine that the smaller the irrigation session length you work with, the more vegetative your irrigation strategy becomes. Yeah, so small, frequent irrigations are vegetative, large, infrequent irrigations are generative. So typically, we were working with irrigation session lengths of 3 or 4%. Yeah. And we were using the principles, yeah, that what are we looking for in decreasing in water content from turning the lights off, from last irrigation to turning the lights off, and from turning the lights on to first irrigation. So if you go back a few years, you know, and the Grodan advice was like 1-2% decrease. Now in this system, we're looking for at least 3-4% decrease, almost double. Yeah. However, the total decrease in water content overnight is still around the 10-12% that we're looking for. Yeah, we're not going any further, but to deliver that 10-12%, we have to be more critical on the irrigation stop and start times. And what we were doing there was using the slope of the decrease in water content from the GrowSense sensors. Yeah. So I just want to give you typical in week 45, which is around first harvest, typically what the irrigation strategy was the last 2 years. And remember, it's almost predictable because I know exactly what the climate's going to be. Yeah. So, for example, the lights are coming on at 2 o'clock in the morning. The first irrigation is at 6. And then pretty much you can work on clock starts or maximum rest time every, buff, buff, buff. And then we're stopping 1 o'clock minus 4 hours before the lights are off. And that's just a little 2% volume just to make sure that we don't decrease the water content too far. Yeah, so to give you an idea of the gift, that's around 2 litres per square metre per day. The DLI is around 17. Leaf area index 1.8, maybe 2. And we've got a fruit load of 364 fruits per square metre. Yeah, and you can see the decrease in water content if I go for mils per hour with the lights on is like, so the uptake, if you want, is 82 mil. And when the lights are off, or I've got natural light, that's dropping to 36 mil per hour. Yeah. So we're steering based on lights off and lights on. And typically this is what it's looking like on the GrowSense. So the yellow is the lit period. And you can see in the natural night with the lights on, I'm steering very generatively with the large sessions, and in the natural day with the lights on, that's when I'm steering more vegetatively, albeit with 3% session sizes. And you can see in that period is where I'm stabilizing the EC. And the thought process of irrigation, start time, stop time, volume and frequency, you can see is keeping a very stable decrease in water content overnight, a very stable day level water content, and the red line is a very stable substrate EC. And pretty much the only thing we're doing with the irrigation is as the time of lights on, lights off changes, we're either extending or reducing the day, also in combination with the increase in leaf area index. So as we're building the crop, so right now in week 45, you saw a leaf area index of 1.8. Our full crop canopy was a leaf area index between, I think, 2.2 and 2.5. Yeah. And that essentially you're building the irrigation, if you can imagine, in plateaus, yeah, as the crop is developing. To give you an idea, of what we applied, which is the red line, to what the uptake is, which is the blue line, and the drain. So we are very precise. And actually, if I look, the drain volumes were very, very low. And if you can imagine, as a grower, why do you need drain? Well, one primary reason for drain is non-uniformity. So if you don't have uniformity, you need to apply more water. And what we were demonstrating here is, yes, it's not a 10-hectare greenhouse, but you can be more critical on your drain volumes. Yeah. So if you're working with a 40% drain volume, you can come back to 20, for example. Yeah. Was the message to the industry. One big misconception as well is the difference between slab EC and drain EC. And you need to understand that difference because you may change the way that you steer. So there's a huge, with a very low drain volume, there's a big difference between the slab EC and the drain EC. So what we see is that a lot of growers react to drain EC as it's increasing, but that may be an overreaction because the EC in the growing media is perfectly fine. So keep that in mind for next winter. Yeah, and just a fun fact there, in the first 30 weeks, I look back in my crop registration data, going back to 2001, the average EC was 2.9. So you can see how EC has evolved, it's increasing as, of course, the growing climate has reduced. But increasing the EC is not the only way to improve total nutrient uptake. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, so basically, this is what we realized. To give you an idea, the gift was around 500. Total drain, 58 litres per square metre. And in 30 weeks, the average drain volume was 8%. Yeah? And you can pretty much see that drain volume was as we were coming out of the lead winter. So a fun fact, back in 2001, in 30 weeks, the average volume of water that was given from my crop registration data was 800 litres per square metre. So we can say double. Yeah, but hey, in those days we had 80-degree pipes. Now, the average drain volume in trial 2 was 13%. So pretty much it was repeated, the same process. Yeah. One issue I said to you was can we stimulate sufficient transpiration? So when you go to a full lead crop with a low heat input, historically, then the uptake per mole of light was about 80 mil. And in fact, in these crops, they were suffering from blossom end rot, for example. That was the issue, even in the winter time. If we go to a hybrid or a full SOM-T crop, then the uptake was anywhere from 100 to 130 mil. So what you see is there's a clear benefit now of active dehumidification, i.e. air movement, stimulating convection evaporation. So we will manage to deliver between 110 to 120 mil per mole. So comparable to a hybrid or full SOM-T system. And there is radiation evaporation and there is convection evaporation, and that's described in the book Plant Empowerment if you've got access to that book. So to give you an idea of the root quality at the end of the lighting season, there it is. So conclusions: active dehumidification, I can stimulate convection evaporation. Irrigation strategy is dead easy because my climate conditions are completely stable. Focus on steering, especially EC, in the root zone and not conditions in the drain, yeah, especially in a low heat input cultivation. And I think we also highlight inputs for further fine-tuning irrigation strategy, which I've not mentioned. So for example, if I know my DLI and I know my HD, I should be able to determine exactly, and my leaf area index, I should be able to determine exactly what the crop will take out for that day. And it's just a matter of structuring how I apply that in practice. And actually, we're working on things like that now with RIDA. Okay, so the next question for the irrigation in the last 2 years and also now in year 3 is, what about the nutrient recipe? So what we did in years 1 and 2 is we created using low nitrate input. Yeah, we controlled the leaf area index. Now you've got to remember that the more leaf area I have, the more evaporation I create, therefore the more energy I need to get rid of that. Yeah, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So we were really conscious of controlling the nitrate in the lead winter, and then round about week 7 starting to increase that slowly. So we start preparing the leaf area increase for the spring. So that was very important. And of course, it's something that you can also do in a conventional non-lead crop. So historically, what we see is, because of the low heat input in winter, that the nutrient elements don't reach the top of the crop because of the lower radiant heat impacting on transpiration and nutrient uptake. What we get, and you will see this in the crop, is you get high dry matter in the leaves, so they really become tight and twisted in the head, and that's a result of a lower total nutrient uptake. Yield is largely fresh weight, so we're also losing potential production as dry matter content in the crop increases. But dry matter and bricks can be assumed to 1-to-1. Therefore a 1% increase in dry matter is a 1% increase in bricks. So I'm always trading off there as a grower. We know that nitrate, and in brackets potassium, stimulates total nutrient uptake, but we also know the more nitrate you give, the more crop volume they create, the higher the leaf area index, and the more vegetative the plant responses will be. Yeah, you're going to get a lower dry matter, therefore you're going to get a lower bricks. So in year 1, it was all about demonstrating we can control leaf area index with a low nitrate input. In year 2, it was we can also play with the other nutrient elements, particularly calcium, magnesium, potassium, and we can manipulate either bricks or fresh weight. Yeah. So, and as I said before, that's what we did, because the high EC is not the only way to developing, making sure you've got sufficient nutrient uptake. It's making sure that as the climate in the greenhouse changes, we also adapt the nutrient recipe. And that's something that's been overlooked, we believe, in recent years. So in year 2, we focused on high EC, traditionally, with a low nitrate feed, balanced with sulfate and chlorides to compensate for the nitrogen. We also had what we called a low EC, also with a low nitrate feed, but we worked with lower potassium levels and different ratios of, as I said, calcium, magnesium in the drip water. And the objectives there, as well as controlling leaf area index, were, hey, can we get a higher fruit weight? Can we realize sufficient bricks, particularly by limiting potassium uptake? And by sufficient bricks, we set the target for greater than 9. Yeah. And at the same time, can I facilitate total nutrient uptake for growth and yield. Yeah, a little bit complicated, but essentially we monitor this every week. So we take some young fruits, we take mature leaves, we take drain samples, drip samples, and that goes to the analytical lab of Normic Granagro Control, and we make sure that the nutrient elements or nutrient uptake in moles per kilogram dry weight are not limiting. Yeah. If they are limiting, then the input feed solution is adjusted accordingly. Yeah. So pretty much, maybe it's a bit of a complicated graph to see shortly, but you can see with the lower EC and the adjusted ratios of potassium, we're giving much less potassium than we are at the high EC, and essentially the message is, but the nitrate levels are the same. Yeah, in the uptake, which is the blue lines. Yeah, in each graph. To give you an example of the average EC for the 30 weeks in trial 2, taken directly from the RIDA, the yield. So high EC we got 17.7, low EC we got 18. There's a difference there of 3%. In bricks, the high EC gave us an increase 3%. So yeah, you take away from one, you gain the other. As I said, 1% dry matter is 1% bricks, and you see it here. But interestingly, fruit size is higher, but the bricks, so this is the 3% bricks, yeah, the loss in 3% bricks. We set the target above 9. So we got 3% more fresh weight, but we still maintain bricks above that critical number 9 on average. Yeah, in the middle of January, we did drop below, but crucially, we stayed above 9 for the trial, and that was the goal. And now we begin to learn more of how nutrient management and nutrient ratios can now play more of a role in controlling output traits, fruit size, bricks, especially as we strive to lower energy inputs into a greenhouse. If you looked at bricks and water uptake, you can draw a relationship like this, which a data science did. I'm not a data scientist, and I saw 2 rectangles. Yeah, bosh. So you can see, for example, in where we're looking, if you remember the water uptake in terms of mil per mole, 100, 120, the lead winter, there are a lot of other things potentially influencing bricks than as we move out more into the spring, when we're venting more and there's more impact on the sun. So we need to dig into this in a bit more detail, basically. So come on to the lighting. Philips Green Power top lighting, again in trial 2, 300 micromole. They were dimmable, color controllable with the 2 channels. We were dynamically steering, so one half of the greenhouse was steered dynamically, the other half was kind of kept static. As I said, we were demonstrating different recipes. So this is where the Philips GrowWise program was talking to the RIDA. So we would set different recipes, and the RIDA climate computer would control to those recipes. And those recipes were mainly to demonstrate opportunities to growers. And as I said before, we work with the bumblebee light, for example. Hey, Mr. Grower, if you work with the bumblebee light, maybe you can keep your climate screen closed 24 hours a day. Yeah, for example. And one of the main things that we were looking at is we were also turning off the least energy efficient green and blue channels and boosting the red channel at certain times of the day. And basically the question there was, can we save electrical energy without impacting yield? And the answer is yes, you can. So to give you an example of the 2 years, so 23, 24 trial 1 is the orange line, and 24, 25 is the grey line. So again, we're trying to target around 22 moles per day. During that, week 48 to week 8 is around 22.6. Total light sum was 4,600 in trial 2 compared to 3,900. Hey, we went from 250 micromole to 300. So we were 19% more lighting hours, if you like, or moles. And from that, I think we got about 17% more production. So our light use efficiency also increased. Yeah. So to give you an example, spectral dimming, there was no effect on on yield, but by taking out the least efficient LED spectra, we demonstrated savings of around €6,000 per hectare, yeah, compared to static lighting. So now we can start, the goal wasn't to say, hey, this light recipe is the best. The goal was to say that, hey, by playing with different recipes, potentially you can save money. And of course, this is what Philips will be taking forwards in their own trials in the coming years. To give you an idea of the light use efficiency, we try and target 4.5 gram per mole. We realized 4.77. So trial 2, we had 19% more light compared to trial 1, and we got 17% more yield. Yeah. So the light use efficiency over the 30 weeks rose basically to 3.91 in trial 2 from 3.8. Yeah. Now the nitty gritty. So if we look to heat consumption in 30 weeks, of the light season, we got 10.7 cubic meters of gas. Now, if we extrapolate that to the end of the season, that would take me to around 15 cubic meters of gas. Yeah. And if you remember, and I've put the slide at the bottom right there, growers are thinking that 30 cubes is the minimum and we can't go any lower. So actually, we demonstrated that new technologies in humidity control offer potentially 50% savings on heat input compared to standard. That's essential. So we set a target of 40%. We actually demonstrated over 2 years a 52% savings on heat input. So basically you can see comparison to the reference grower. So in Europe, I said we were using Vitalian. There's what they call the Vitalian Club. In Europe, it's a bit like Piccolo. They protected it. So BASF Nunham's brought in growers from the Vitalian Club in Europe, and they acted as reference growers for us in this trial. So you can see that we demonstrated to the Vitalian Club 50% savings in heat input without compromises to yield, and in the end also quality. And if we look at, it's all about kilowatt hours per kilo now if you're a lighted grower. Yeah. So we consumed a total of 324 kilowatt hours in trial 1, 313 kilowatt hours in trial 2. Even though the light input was greater, remember we use the pipe rail much less. Yeah. And it's important to know now, the energy balance in that greenhouse, at 69% of the energy input is coming from the LED lights. So savings on 69% are going to be far greater than savings on, for example, the dehumidification system, which only accounted for 3.1 6% of the total energy input in that greenhouse. And that's a massive shift if you even go, if you compare it to reference growers. But if you go back to the year 2000, vast majority of energy input in the greenhouse was for humidity control. Yeah. So again, my statement is, active dehumidification will become part of your high-tech greenhouse in the future. And in fact, what we see now in Europe, and I think Planet Earth, so part of the Kai Red Star, they've invested in active dehumidification in their new built greenhouse here in the UK. So with the early adopters of technology, it's happening. But I do appreciate that it's all about your energy market and what you pay and the investment costs. And that's going to be different for different areas of the world. But my belief is it's going to happen. Yeah, it's starting now. Summary. So, nicely on time. I think as growers, consultants, you've got to look this holistic approach. Yeah, so you've got to focus on everything. When you change the climate conditions in the greenhouse, everything else changes with it. So they need to be adapted. Yeah, that's the message. I think what we will see is more and more control over LED lights here especially now. I think there's what they call the horticulture light protocol. So there are 3 levels. Yeah, so 1, 2, and 3. There you go. So you need, your system needs to be level 3 if you need for dynamic steering multi-channel control. Yeah, so that's a discussion to have with your light installation, so that it can work on your climate computer. And the other thing to remember is irrigation, and particularly nutrient steering. Generative steering is the name of the game. Controlled development of leaf area index, understanding how as growers, by manipulating the nutrient ratios, you can change between fruit weight, fresh weight, or dry weight, which is bricks. And as I said before, we've got to further evaluate the role of potassium on bricks. Like I said, nitrate is responsible for total nutrient uptake, but to a certain degree also potassium. But the more potassium we have, we can also affect positively or negatively bricks. Trial 3, just to give you an overview in the last 5 minutes. As again, we've gone from Vitalian to Maxize. Why? Well, it's the most common variety grown under LED light in the Netherlands. In a low heat input full LED system, it suffers from red-green fruit, which you see opposite. And can we solve this problem? There's the trial setup. So we go, instead of dynamically steering the LED lights now, we go for 1/2 of the greenhouse being interlights, 25%, and the other half being top lights. We've got a production plan for both. So it's saying that the interlights should be more, improve the light use efficiency in the middle of the canopy. Let's see. It's just been planted 2-3 weeks ago. The research questions is that the nitrate potassium ratio is a key indicator for the fruit quality disorder, and that this trial we will show that with an adjusted nutrient recipe we can alleviate the problem. So we've got 2 drip water compositions, a standard where we predict the risk of green spots is 15%, and the adjusted with a predicted risk of less than 10%. And this is using model data from previous trials that have been done with this variety Maxize. Yeah. And we're going to monitor the nutrient composition weekly, as we've done in the previous 2 years, and the actual uptake will be tracked to the predicted uptake of the key variables, nitrate and potassium. So nutrient treatments are, the standard is a low nitrate feed, but that's balanced traditionally with high levels of sulfate, because that's where the growers get the generativity from. However, the sulfate also impacts on the cation uptake, potassium, So in the adjusted strategy, again, we've got a low nitrate feed, we've got lower calcium and magnesium ratio or concentrations, but importantly, the sulfate concentration is limited. And that's basically preventing, the idea is, interference with potassium uptake. And that will be delivered with an EC of around 3.1. Yeah. So we've got a planned what we plan to see, how we plan to adjust these through the 30 weeks. Because once you have a plan, you can track against it. Yeah. So just like you would do in your yield, your energy, we've got the similar thing now, albeit with nutrition. And basically, this is what we predict will happen. Yeah. You can see the predicted nitrate uptake is about the same, but potassium uptake would be significantly higher in the adjusted strategy where we've got far less sulfate. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website. There is a full page dedicated to this trial where you've got white papers, video blogs from the various Marcom partners, Granagro, Amalan, Wireless Valley with their sensors, Ridder, and of course the variety of Italian at this stage, BASF. So that's me.
Thank you, Andy. Do you have time for a couple of questions if anybody does have a question?
Did it make sense?
Did it make sense to the growers is the most important question.
I do. I think some guys from New Zealand came either last year or the year before.
Yep, a few of us came to and visited Tico, visited Botany actually. Yep.
Yeah.
It was this year.
Gave the presentation then indeed.
So that's what we're working on here in Europe. There, next door in the greenhouse, there's also a cucumber low energy crop, and they've this year switched to go full electric.
So Andrew, I have
no gas, no gas at all. They've gone Tesla, basically.
Yeah. Andrew, there is one question. I'm just a little bit later this meeting, but the last slide uses 69% energy coming from the LED and 3.66% from humidifier. So that's meaning we are saving the gas for 70%, right? Let's put it in the perfect number on that.
So I'm just giving you this. It's just basically the split now. If you were to divide the total energy input for what we're doing, then 69% of that energy input is coming from the LED lights. So saving 10% of 69%, for example, is going to bring you far more returns than saving 10% on 3.66%. That's the message, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And you can see where the shift has gone, in 25 years. There's a massive shift, especially for a winter crop. And the message was that it's far cheaper to blow air than heat air. That was the underlying message. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
So we also see active dehumidification also coming now in propagation. So I can see Steve there. We had the International Propagation Seminar a few weeks ago, and Van der Enden were demonstrating their system of active dehumidification for propagators. So it's happening, and how quickly it happens in New Zealand, of course, is all down to your energy market.
Yeah, definitely. Energy market is really short here. Also, another like a silly question, not that, but if you say that LED is the working like a 24 hours, which is on the winter time, and we have a paste white fly as a tomato. So on
Yeah, no,
that, effect is going to more, or they are developing more.
the LED lights maximum we're going for 22 moles per day, and that's in 18 hours. Yeah, so it's an 18-hour day, if you like, with the LED lights. They're not on 24 hours, if that was the question.
Okay, but in that
Yeah.
light, there's a paste is the multiplies more than like a sunlight, or there's any research on that?
Yeah. Well, if I get the question right, we guarantee that, for example, the idea is that we're getting 19 moles from the outside light, and then up to 22 is, sorry, from the LED lights, and then the 22 is coming from natural light. But you can imagine if I've got the screens closed constantly, then that 22 mole is having to come from the LED lights. So you have to think about all of that when you figure out the capacity of your light system.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't show you also that the blackout screen, you know, in winter is also completely closed, but it's both screens. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and the greenhouse climate is completely stable. We had the data scientists come in, and they, fancy things, standard deviations around the means of all measurements, and it was like less than one. Very,
So,
very stable greenhouse condition. It's like growing in, I'm not going to say it, but these vertical farms. Yeah, it's basically for 2 months of the year, you've got a greenhouse that is effectively a shed. Yeah, it's completely sealed, apart from the active dehumidification system.
So would that mean that the pest pressure is less?
Um, Pretty much, but we don't really.
I know
Okay,
it's not part of your trial.
they've got Nasidio which is a bit of a problem for the lit crops in winter. But we've had no issues with pest or disease. You get a bit of mildew, which is controllable. You get a bit of whitefly, which is controllable. But apart from that, of course, one thing that we did do, and why we chose Battalion and why we've got max size XR, is that for me, it made no sense that your marketing strategy should bankrupt your business. So we went for rugose resistant varieties. Yeah, because hey, that's also the future. That's why we chose these varieties, and we didn't stay, for example, with Philips wanted to stay with Piccolo. So that's madness for me. Yeah. Anyway, that's why we went for Italian, because it's rugose resistant. But in trials 1 and 2, we wanted to demonstrate what we call the superior cherry truss segment. Yeah.
Did anyone else have anything they wanted to ask?
Oh, and on the pest and disease issue as well, those plants were inoculated with the Pepino vaccine. Yeah, for obvious reasons.
Well, maybe a question to the crowd is what do you think is the applicability of such systems or such growing techniques in New Zealand? If someone dares to answer.
Well, maybe I can prompt is
No,
if you've
not
got
you,
lights.
Andy.
Well, there's silence, but maybe I'll stimulate somebody. You can, whether
Okay,
you've got
okay.
lights or no lights, you can think about the way you irrigate and your nutrition, especially, nitrate to control the balance early on. There are a lot of things that you can take from this, even though you don't have dehumidification, yeah, or even lights.
Yeah, I think that there's just not that many growers with lights in New Zealand yet.
Yeah, but
So
here,
that still has to develop. As far as I'm
yeah,
concerned, it's only the guys at Mogai, correct?
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
screening, vent control, irrigation, nutrition.
What is the roughly cost is the for the lights and humidity part per square meter?
Or you can figure what you pay for your energy and do that translation for yourself. If you're asking the investment cost for the lights, then you need to ask Philips. If you're asking the investment cost for dehumidification system, then you ask Amalan or Van der Ende
Okay.
or somebody else. But I think in that presentation, I put in the indicative energy costs. I think it was electrical energy. Was it 13 cents a kilowatt hour, something like that from memory? So I think in one of my last slides, per kilo of fruit, it was 2.3 euros per kilo of fruit. Shall I show you again briefly from memory? If I go up. Yeah. Can you see that?
Yep.
So what we got in the winter season, 2.3 years energy input per kilo of fruit. So that's the translation we're now making. Yeah. Kilos per square meter now becomes energy input per kilo produced. So they're the numbers that you can work with. And that, of course, remember, is for a winter full lead crop. But you can make the translation yourself, even if you don't use lights.
Yep.
But you see how, I mean, the dehumidification system is so cheap to run. In trial one, we were turning it off at some times in the day. Why? It's almost cost nothing. Yeah, less, almost. Well, if you translate that 11 kilowatt hours, it's 1.1 cubic meters of gas per square meter for the entire trial. It's ridiculously cheap. Of course, the capex are
Is
another
in the
story.
machinery itself, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but like Andy, are these slides for to share as well? Because let's say you are planning on building a new greenhouse and you need investment from whatever company, or private equity or a bank, and you're saying, okay, I want to install this dehumidification system and LED lights, etc. This will cost me this much approx, but on the other hand, I will be able to get my ROI in place within 10 to 20 or 15 years, looking at the numbers that are known through the research
Yeah.
that we or other parties have done. Is that something that you've seen happening before already?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you. Yes.
Oh, well, this material, we don't do this to keep things secret, of course. This material, as I said, is you can find it on the
Yeah.
website that I directed everybody to. The slides are what we presented at various grower forums, our own kind of knowledge transfer end of trial seminars. So there's nothing there that's not that's not
Shareable.
shareable. Like I said before, is I take the example of plant empowerment. Yeah, that research was done or started in 2011 to 2015. Yeah? It's more than 10 years ago. It's taken 10 years for terminology like absolute humidity, yeah, and heat emission to become common language for the growing industry and for growers to actually adopt that way of growing. 10 years. So what I'm saying right now is this I'm almost now we're just stimulating some thoughts and whatever, opportunities. But imagine now 10 years from now, what is the situation? And when I first, for some UK growers in 2013, we started talking about absolute humidity. I know what the reaction was in that room, yeah, beyond this is a load of old nonsense. That was in 2013. In 2025, the reality is everybody understands what absolute humidity is and what it means for greenhouse humidity control and the importance of understanding absolute humidity for energy saving. So, some of the growers in the rooms that we've been in, say, well, you know, you're doing things different. I can't work with no drain volume. I say, I appreciate that. But if my trial is copying what you're doing in practice, there is no benefit of my trial. So I'm demonstrating, yeah, I can work with zero drain, 8% for 30 weeks. Now, if you've got a 10-hectare greenhouse, maybe that's a bit risky for you. But if you're working with 40% drain, you can come back, for example, to 20% drain. Think of the impact of that, not only on if you're steering generatively, but also root quality, for example. Yeah.
I think
So again, translating this, just simply understanding there's a difference between drain EC and slab EC, and if you know there's a difference, how you might steer more generatively by knowing that difference.
I agree, Andrew, because that uh, I know also we used to work is 3.4 cc per joule to 3.5 cc per joules to give the water, and now we
Yeah,
are not doing that one. Still, our crop is good, so that's like
yeah,
learning things, and we can save a lot of in fertilizers.
yeah. Well, I mean, one of the biggest ways to save fertilizer is to recycle your drain water. But of course, on top of that, optimizing the gift is not only helping you save because you've got less to recycle, therefore adjustments become easier, but you're also protecting plant balance, root quality, fruit quality. Yeah. You're protecting, for a high total production as well. Yeah, and we've been working with, completely closed systems, I think since 2015 now. By legislation in Holland, that 2027 is when the legislation finally kicks in. But I think growers have been working completely closed now for 5 or 6 years. And that's all about protecting surface water quality, not just nutrition, for the but also plant protection products that are also released. So there's a kind of a double whammy there. So a lot of growers are completely closed now. Well, all growers are. In the Netherlands, because that's driven by legislation. So what I find that drives change in our business is crisis and legislation, and we're never too far away from both.
And on that really happy note, we might have to call it a day.
Okay.
You guys need to get on with your work and your working day. And for us, it's time to have an evening.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much, Andy. Thank you, Tico.